NCAA tournament time for the Diamond Dogs. Hi there, I'm Cody Chaffins inside our DawgNation studio. We'll be joined by our DawgNation Baseball writer Jack in just a moment, but we are here to get you ready for this weekend's Athens Regional. The road to Omaha starts right here for the Georgia Bulldogs. This weekend, they will welcome in UNC-Wilmington, Georgia Tech, and Army as they will all fight it out to get a spot in the Super Regionals. Now, earlier this week, Georgia earned that number 7 overall national seed, so they now have home field advantage for the first 2 rounds as they try to make their way to the College World Series. But it's not a given. The last 2 times Georgia has hosted NCAA regionals, they failed to get out of the regional and move on to the Super. Has some great stats here from Baseball America. Since 1999, almost 2/3 of regional champs or regional hosts have won their regional. That's good news for Georgia. But last year, only 9 of the 16 moved on. So that is something to be concerned about. How do the Dogs take advantage of home field advantage here this weekend and move on to the Supers and possibly on to Omaha? To help us answer that question, we bring in our DawgNation Baseball writer, Jack Leo. You have seen his byline on DawgNation.com all season long. Jack, thanks for coming to join us here to talk a little baseball. So for Georgia, it's all going to start with the pitching. How does the pitching line up for this weekend? They will open Game 1 against Army Friday, a 1 o'clock first pitch. Will we go see the typical Friday night starter, Leighton Finley, in that one?
You know, there's kind of 2 different schools of thought. Some people will hold off and say, well, maybe we should take our number 1 guy and wait for that, Game 2 where you've got that 2 seed and that 3 seed winner of that one and hold him there. I kind of went back to last year when Wes Johnson was coaching this guy by the name of Paul Skeens. You might have heard of him.
I've heard of him. Nice stash.
Nice stash, nice stats, that whole thing, right? So pitched really well, obviously, and he went ahead and pitched him night 1. I'd imagine it would be the same thing here. You don't really have a Paul Skeens per se. You've just got a bunch of really great pitchers that have kind of figured things out over the last really half of the season. So I think when you're looking at that, I think they're just going to go night 1. Let's just get in the routine. Let's get rolling.
Yeah, and speaking of Game 1, you really got to have somebody out there. Another one of these stats from Baseball America, just one team in the last 2 years has lost their first game and still advanced out of the regional. So you got to win the first one, although, like you said, I think some people would argue that second game is the most important. Either you are going to be in the catbird seat to move on if you've won, or you're fighting for your life if you've lost that game. So Game 2, so we talked about Leighton Finley, probably our Game 1 starter, typical Friday night starter in the SEC. Kolten Smith would be the number 2?
I would imagine so. That's what it's been the last few weeks. And the guy could be their number 1 right now. And they've pitched him Game 1 when the scheduling's kind of rolled out that way, and they want to give Finley the normal rest he gets and all that. And yeah, but Kolten Smith, you're talking about a guy who going into April had a 9.14 ERA. He was coming off, and it was against Tennessee, best team in the country, the rankings would say. But coming off an appearance where he gave up 2 grand slams in one appearance, right? And just kind of flips it around in April. Now he's got a sub-5 ERA, leads the team in strikeouts. He's been, pitching out of his mind. And he's been a huge, that mental change has been huge for Georgia's ability to do what it's done over the last month and a half now.
Let's just quickly stick with pitching just for a moment, because Georgia only played 1 game in the SEC tournament, lost LSU, and they were done. And it wasn't one of those frontline pitchers who went in that first game. So 2 weeks off, is that a good thing or a bad thing for these pitchers?
I think it's a good way to go. It was kind of something that was funny, kind of talking to Wes Johnson after the final game of the regular season, which was a pretty ugly loss to Florida. He had talked about kind of that strategy of, well, we don't need to go to the tournament to win a game. Georgia isn't one of those teams that is like fighting for its life in the postseason, right? There were 5 13-win teams in the SEC that went into that tournament saying, we need to do everything we can to make sure that we're in this NCAA tournament next week. Georgia is not one of those teams. Right. So they're saying, and what I assume Wes Johnson said when he started, Jarvis Evans was the guy. He said, well, we can keep our best guys, your Leighton Finleys, your Kolten Smiths. Let's keep these guys rested, give them some time to prepare. Obviously, they're pitching right now. They're doing what they need to prep for this next start, and just be ready when everyone comes to Athens, because you pretty much knew you were going to host a regional.
Right. And you talked about Wes Johnson, and really from the big picture, this is why he's here, right? He's a guy who has proven, at least as an assistant coach, that he can win throughout the NCAA tournament. Something Scott Strickland could not do in his time in Athens is get out of a regional, move on in the NCAA tournament. So how does having Wes Johnson, who, like you said, last year rode that way all the way with LSU, how does him kind of knowing how to navigate this help this Georgia team?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but having listened to him all year, when we ask these types of questions, he's pretty. It's a good question. He tends to downplay this kind of thing, and he'll. But I would say comfortability over everything, right? I mean, if I feel like it's when you get to Omaha, if you get there, you know which side of the breakfast bar the pancakes are on, right? It's that kind of thing. And then everything else that happens to maybe it's cornbread, it's Nebraska, who knows? But the point is, you're just comfortable the rest of the day. You're just there. And, when it comes to making, those in-game decisions, Wes Johnson, he talks a lot about having analytics that drive a lot of the decisions he makes, whether it be putting a batter, what do I pinch hit this guy? Do I pinch run this guy? Do I, swap my pitcher right here? All those things. He doesn't talk about those analytics in detail ever, but he will, take a moment and say, he talks a lot about those analytics. And I imagine, he's going to continue to use those numbers to make decisions in crunch time in these tournaments as well.
This is why I love having you on, Jack, because you're a guy who's not just since Charlie Condon blew up, been following this Georgia team, or since they went on their run of winning all these consecutive games. No, you've been a guy who's been in the dugout with Wes Johnson the entire time. So you've got some great insight, and we appreciate it. All right, so you talked about the Florida series where Georgia wins the first game and then kind of disappointingly loses the series. Then they lose to LSU. Is this team able to turn it around and get hot at the right time?
I mean, gosh, they just did it, right? I mean, you lose the first two to Texas A&M, you pull out a game 3 there, and then you turn around after that series loss, you come home, and everyone's thinking, Georgia. I think they were 10-11 at the time. They've got a chance to win, to win 15 games and sneak into a regional, that kind of thing, be one of those mid-tier SEC teams. Well, and what do? They sweep Vanderbilt at home. The same team that Corey Collins, I love that he called him this, the New York Yankees of college baseball, right? Like that's the team that they just turn around the next week and just, we're going to sweep them. I mean, this is, and then the next week you go and you sweep South Carolina, right? So, I mean, this is a team of a lot of veteran guys. And I'll say this, even talking to the younger guys who do play on this team, they sound like veterans. And it's because they're surrounded by, a greater group of veterans. And I mean, that's what they're going to do. I don't think they're the type that's going to remember a lot from the past, good or bad. They're just going to build, and they're going to go out there and they're going to play confident.
All right, so we've made it, I don't even know, maybe a world record of not talking about Charlie Condon when we're talking about Georgia baseball. So let's get to it. Everybody knows the stats that he's put up, but the question is, can he shine in the biggest moment? I will just take a look at some of the numbers. Hits 443 overall this season, but 412 in the SEC. That's not too bad. 19 of his 35 homers have come against Southeastern Conference opponents. So when the bright lights are on, can Charlie Condon step up to the plate?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we haven't seen him in postseason. He was on the team the last time Georgia was there, but redshirting, obviously didn't take any at-bats or anything like that. But, I mean, gosh, everyone would tell you on that Georgia baseball team that every SEC weekend would feel like that big game opportunity, right? Especially, I'm sure, when you're on the road at Duty Noble Field in Mississippi State or up at, in Knoxville, right? I mean, there are so many environments that you're going to play in just as an SEC baseball team that feel like regional environments, right? And so I think when you look at that, and when you look at the success he had, I think you said 19 home runs in SEC games or something like that.
Right.
It's been unreal, right? And those are all big stages. Those are all big time arms, guys that are, at least a large portion of them are going to get drafted at some point. And it's like, he steps up and he does it super calm, super cool, super collected, just how he handles all the noise, everything else. It's who he is. They call him the captain for a reason. If you're a captain on a pirate ship, you can't be losing your mind with every wave, right? He goes down 0-2. That's a couple waves, but he's going to turn around and he's going to mash the next one 400 feet, right? We've seen him do it a bajillion times. So I don't foresee that being an issue with him or really anyone else on this team. I mean, they're just a cool group. You don't see a whole lot of emotion, and then when you do, it's usually in the dugout celebrating a homer. So,
well, I matey to that. So we talk about Charlie Condon. And the one thing he's done, he's passed Gordon Beckham, who was considered the, at least for more recent fans, the greatest Georgia baseball player. Of course, you can go back to some of the guys in the 80s as well. But when you talk about Gordon Beckham, one thing he did do was take that team to a College World Series final back in 2008. So I feel like that is the one box that is unchecked for Charlie Condon, and that will only build on his legacy. And I think he's far surpassed Gordon Beckham already, but it is the one thing that Beckham has done that he has not done.
Yeah, it's championships that matters, and then that's the reality of it. Obviously it leans a lot less on Charlie than maybe it would if you were a point guard on a basketball team, and it's baseball is it's a team concept sport, but it's a lot of individuality, right? I mean, at the end of the day, Charlie Condon's got to be at the plate at the right times, but I mean, he's got to show up. You're absolutely right, and it'll be cool to see how he and other guys on this team that were around last year and you've seen develop, like Kolten Smith, like Leighton Finley, and then obviously Charlie Condon, do in the first actual postseason play they've got here.
All right, so let's talk about some of these teams who are coming into Athens for the regional. One sticks out like a sore thumb above the other two, especially for true dog fans out there. In Georgia and Georgia Tech, they've got an incredible history in NCAA postseason play. Last time Georgia went to the College World Series, we talked about 2008. Georgia Tech was in the regional. Georgia has beaten Tech in a super regional to advance to Omaha. So there's a lot of history, way back history, but there's a lot of really recent history between Georgia and Georgia Tech this year. I think back to March 1st, Tech's going to get season swept by Georgia, and they call off the game because of rain, will not restart it no matter what. In a fifth inning, Georgia was up 9-3. So there's definitely some bad blood, some clean old-fashioned hate, if you will, here, right?
I will say this, that was the most visibly frustrated I have seen Wes Johnson all year. I mean, and I think what really dug about that was the 15 minutes between when they called it and when they said we need to stop play, 3 outs before the game could have ended, that the tarp wasn't even on the field and they were just let rain just pound, that Georgia Tech field and those ACC umpires. And I'm going to keep my foil hat off my head for the moment, but it was definitely an interesting thing. And I know a lot of Dog fans are excited to see their team get a chance to maybe get one, maybe 2 more wins over Tech and really, grind that fist in there. So yeah, they almost feel like the 2 seed,
They do, because UNC-Wilmington technically is the 2. Georgia Tech, I mean, really at the end of the season, probably happy we saw the video, they were celebrating to get into the NCAA tournament. There wasn't a show like that at Georgia because, like you said, the only question was, would they get the national seed? And they do end up getting that number 7 national seed. So the other 2 teams that are coming, it's going to be Army in game 1 Friday night or Friday afternoon at 1:00. So what do we know about Army?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously on the film side of things, I can't say I've dug in too much, but you see a program that, I mean, first off, they're good enough to make the field. I mean, there's no one here that you should bat an eye at, right? I did see a quote from Wes Johnson. It was in a school release. I don't know exactly where it's from. He's talking about their pitching. He said, maybe not like eye-popping velo, but these guys are disciplined. They mix pitches well and all that stuff. And obviously, that's really important if you're playing them game 1. I mean, if they take the same strategy that I'm sure Georgia will, it seems pretty much every program across the country is going to take, right, is pitch your best guy game 1. Well, if Army's got pretty good pitching, then Georgia's going to have to come out hot, a lot hotter than they did in that SEC tournament game, right? And so you start to wonder, I mean, Army maybe not, going to bully you with the bat like Georgia might, but some really strong pitching there on the mound that you're going to have to come out and be ready to face.
Yeah, and you say the word disciplined. That's you think of the boys from West Point. They're going to be disciplined. That's for sure. UNC-Wilmington, they have a great baseball history as well. Do you know much about them?
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing that people are going to see is, UNC-Wilmington. Well, that's not a name I've heard a bunch. And then you look at the conference, the CAA, which I believe is the Continental American Conference, Continental Athletic Association. Sorry, something like that. And, I mean, these are, yeah, right. So, I mean, but these guys are tourney champs, of that conference, right? And this is a conference that a lot of people felt another team should have made it, right? And Charleston, another team from that conference is Campbell that has won, I think they went to 5 straight tournaments, something like that. And it's a conference that puts a lot of teams in the NCAA tournament and, is known for some really solid baseball. And I'll tell you another thing that's really interesting about this regional in particular is when, I mean, you know about Charlie Condon, you know about what a power hitter he is. UNCW walks in with a guy named Tanner Thatch, who's got 27 homers on the year himself. So another guy who stepped into a smaller field like Foley Field, he gets a hold of a couple, winds blowing the right way, and suddenly we could be looking at some long double-digit Saturday games. So
that's why we come to you, a name like Tanner Thatch. All right, so we'll see if he can put some over those pine trees out there in left field, kind of the way Charlie does. So game one, as we've said a couple of times now, it's a 1 o'clock Friday start. Going to be tough for Dog fans to get there. If you win that game, you get the 6 o'clock Saturday night, which is going to be electric, no doubt about it, especially if it happens to be the guys from North Avenue who are playing against Georgia in that game. But for a Friday start, can you expect a big atmosphere for a 1 o'clock first pitch there at Foley Field?
I mean, that's the idea, right? I mean, this is, gosh, we're talking about the first time in 5 years we've had postseason baseball in Athens. And I know it is tough. And I mean, you said it right. I mean, students are out of town, all those things. So, I mean, we shall see. But there have been a lot of times this year where I've been very surprised at how well Foley Field crowds have shown up in games. I'm like, it is 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, right? We're playing, I mean, we're watching an Iowa-Georgia game here, right? That's what we're doing. But people rock up and they show up, and it's been interesting to watch. So I mean, I wouldn't count it out.
Yeah, home field advantage, a real thing. And, you know, obviously if you can get to the super regional, even bigger, right?
Absolutely. I mean, gosh, you're talking about a huge 3-game series. You're knocking on the door of something you hadn't seen since 2008 in the College World Series. I mean, what's not to get excited about? I mean, what are you doing in June that's more exciting than, you know, the return of Georgia baseball, as Charlie Condon has talked about bringing back to Athens?
Yeah, nothing quite like postseason NCAA baseball. Can't wait to see that. Can't wait to see your coverage. We know all teams will be in Athens on Thursday. All will be practicing. We'll hear from all of them. So you better look at DawgNation.com. You can find some of Jack's columns there. You can get read up. He'll be there all weekend long, having complete coverage for us on DawgNation.com of this Athens Regional, and as the Diamond Dogs take their first steps on the road to Omaha. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you this weekend at Foley Field.
Thanks so much.